So let's look at state policy. What has the state done to police Carnival in the time since they have established a formal way of doing that? Of course, I understand that this has been happening for hundreds of years, but we're looking at the modern state. And so, since 1957, with the formation of the CDC under Dr. Eric Williams, the state has tried to police Carnival. And this was revised in 1991 with the formation of the NCC. So the NCC is actually 20 years old this year. So it's past its teenage years. And so we want to know how have they performed, and how, if we look at the way in which the NCC has policed the Carnival, what lessons can we learn or not learn in terms of the wider multicultural or cultural policy. So the main objectives, as stated then and revised in 2006, were to make Carnival a viable national, cultural and commercial enterprise. Notice what the first objective is, right? To provide necessary managerial and organizational infrastructure for the efficient and effective presentation and marketing of the cultural products of Carnival, and then to establish arrangements for ongoing research, the preservation and permanent display of the annual accumulation of Carnival products created each year by the craftsmen, musicians, composers, and designers of Carnival. Whoa, what a thing, okay? So I think if you swap out Carnival and these things for culture, you might find this a very funny story, isn't it? Okay? So that's what them trying to do. Okay? So if we look at the performance, right? So let's look at the socio-economic, which would be related, I guess, to objective 2. Okay? In fact, they don't really state a socio-cultural objective in the NCC things. Does that now make sense to you? Why Carnival is going where it's going? Because there's not a stated socio-cultural or geopolitical objective. So let me get it straight. They're about making Carnival into a money spinner. Okay? Right. So when we look at, go back here, right? In the 1990s, when these objectives were first culled, right? We have to remember, the young ones in the audience may not remember, but we were going through a period of what we call structural adjustment. Right? Economic hardship, pretty much just like what we're doing now, okay? So the pressing need was to find alternative vectors for socio-economic development. And then also we had an NAR government that was imploding based on the same sort of coalition and ethnic politics. And so Carnival, too, there was an increased politicization of this issue of ethnic diversity. Therefore, the policy problems identified as diversity within the country, new avenues of economic development, and the peripheral nature of TNT's geopolitical power in the global environment. Carnival, therefore, was seen as a policy solution for all these other developmental problems, and not as an autonomous policy sphere in and of itself. So, from the point of view of the state, all they were concerned with is using Carnival to fulfill other options, other developmental problems, and not as a thing in and of itself. And I think that's an important and interesting observation. So when we look at the socio-cultural, what they have done in their 20 years, Carnival is marketed internally as a springboard for national unity, a safety valve, a model for promoting togetherness, and this all of we is one meta-narrative. Okay? Yeah? And then it encourages diversity at the community level. So the NCC conducts all these regional workshops throughout the island on their website, which is where I got the last bit of information. They say between 2003 and 2010, they have trained 9,500 people, right, in traditional mass. And this year, their budget for the regional carnivals, which is where the traditional masquerade abides, is $7 million, okay? If we look at the objective 2, which is what they're really concerned about, which is developing the economic potential, we see that there has been increased expenditure on Carnival. Look at the growth of NCC subvention from government. In 1996, it was $12 million. That jumped to 70 million in 2008, and this year, we hear it's about $120 million plus. Okay? I'm not a mathematician, but that is like something like, 100% something. Right? Then look at the increased visitors, right? 1997, we had a paltry 20,000 people come into Carnival, right? And in 2008, which was the last time we had figures, really, we had about 45,000 people. About 60% of these are returning residents, so we'll get back to that in a minute. And they spend an average of about, this is according to the CSO, $306 a day, right? That's plenty money, okay, that people spend when they come. Of course, 2008 was pre-global financial crisis, right? So we probably had less in 2009 and 2010. They tried to do incentives for business and tried to encourage businesses to invest in culture. The more recent, they've taken off and dusted off the 2001 thing, which tried to get businesses to invest by recently announcing that they're now businesses investing up to $2 million get back their investment. They've developed a system to accrue revenue for broadcast rights. I think Julian spoke about that, so who owns Carnival, etc. And they tend to invite and host overseas journalists to assist in this marketing drive. But what has all of this meant? Okay. It has meant that Carnival has increasingly been left up to business concerns, while the social or artistic agenda, inclusion, diversity, has increasingly been seen as secondary. The social inequities in the society are being recreated in this approach. So the new and old business classes are more capable of exploiting the economic opportunities than the working class. In fact, I think the business community has been increasingly ignoring the role of these institutions of support, like the NCC, in facilitating or shaping the festival. Them doing Carnival, whether the NCC there or not. And one of the things where we look at, so every year band launches occur before the NCC officially launches Carnival, right? Because the business imperative has its own rhythm, and it has to start before the NCC is ready to launch Carnival in January, right? So we have band launches in the middle of the year now, June and July and so on. Okay? All right. And I want to try and see why there has been this, what I call this stasis in the policy. So when we look at, and I think it has to do with the institutions, the state institutions who developed the Carnival, and there's this dissonance between finding balance between the cultural and the economic. So I want to position this here. If you look at the policy, the policy impact, there are two different imperatives. So there's a creative arts policy, which is state-centric. Its audience of governments and artists. It gives to traditional elites. The emphasis is on the production of culture. Whereas there's a creative industry policy, and this is for the people operating in the two outer circles where the emphasis is on business. That's transnational, that's industry-based. The audience is trade and industry. There's a new business elite, and the emphasis is on the consumer. So there's this tension between the old and the new policy, and this is what is causing the problem, I think. So there is status. There's a kind of stasis. There are many similarities between the Carnival complex and the general arts and cultural sector, and these same structures, the same structure as these relate to the strategic and operational norms. The same policy tensions, of course, between the core and the periphery exist in the wider state. So I want to suggest that we develop what I call a carnivalesque stakeholder map, because one of the things that we have to do, or one of the things I'm suggesting, even as we reflect on the development of this new multicultural policy, or the multi, is that we need to develop new ways to police the arts and cultural sector that is dedicated to achieving balance points between these various objectives and strategies. And so, if you look at the stakeholder map, which I'm calling a carnivalesque stakeholder map, you have the economic imperatives, the social, the environment, and the geopolitical, which brings in these transnational patterns that we have in the way that we share our cultural products and expressions within the homeland and also our communities in the diaspora. So the key questions for the development of this and Roald and I met Resistance on Wednesday or something, and he says just call it the Ministry of Multi. So does the multi or diversity approach to cultural policy, and these are the questions we need to ask, undermine the traditional legitimacy of public cultural policy linked to building and the maintenance of a national, Creole cultural identity? How is this multi going to impact if we do it, right? This idea of a national cultural identity. Are they in tension? Is it realistic to expect private sector support to substantially top up or substitute public subsidies to cultural institutions? Can the cultural production or the creative industry save a stagnant economy? This is the questions we need to ask when you hear all the discourse today. And how should the research community react to strong, sometimes exaggerated rhetoric about the economic impact of Carnival? And so I say we have to act, we have to have increased advocacy from the various interest groups. We have to conduct more expansive research beyond economic impact studies. We need to go a little bit more than that. And we need to target specific programs and projects that encapsulate all these imperatives. And I want to end by saying, right, that in crafting this policy, I want to quote Albert Einstein, who says, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. So that's it for me.